Welcome back to R&B podcast with Russ and Blake. You can't find this on the internet. Just kidding. Yes, you can. You can find it wherever you want. We back.
Yeah.
R&B podcast with Russ and Blake. No guest this week. Back to the duo. One time for the city. And 2 days after Mother's Day. So that was very inspirational, obviously. I hope it was for you too. And so today we're going to talk about mothers, how impactful mothers are, how important women are, and how men should maybe try to be a little more sensitive towards them.
Mm.
But Russ, you you have a mom. I have a mom. We're blessed for that. Not everybody grows up with a mom, right?
True.
Not everybody grows up with a dad. Those parental roles are so significant. And we see the fatherless family more frequently than the motherless family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a reason for that. The mom is so crucial. And I know people that have grown up without a mom. I know people that have lost their mother early in life. And I know people that have been very traumatized by losing their mother later in life. And that just goes to show how important the mother role is. And everyone should regard that role in a highest form. And
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes it can get overlooked.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And like you're saying, I think a lot more people grow up in a household with a mom rather than one with just a dad.
Mm-hmm.
From my work experience, I have a lot of meetings with these families, kids who are getting placed in special ed or an alternate education setting, depending
Yeah.
on what their, behaviors and paths are. And it's so common that I'm just meeting with mom and grandma. It's actually kind of rare that I see dad pull up. And, to your point, just the consistency, how many people have their mom or their grandma, that the female figure in their family as like their backbone and their backbone and their support. It's
Mm-hmm.
honestly beautiful, just how they step up, how they sacrifice, how they do what they do.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I think you can relate to this too when we reflect on who taught us what and like some big lessons that we learned from our parents. The things I learned from my mom seem to stand out more, even though there's probably an equivalent amount between like what my parents taught me. And it's just that my dad's lessons, I think sometimes realize them later on down the road, and
Mm.
the moms are just able to communicate in a way that you know in the moment that they just want the best for you. And I know that's not for everyone, but at least for me, the intention is just always so pure. And my mom is also a nurse, so I think that some of those qualities kind of from nursing overflowed into her parenting, which I'm appreciative for as well, and something that I hope to model myself. Obviously, not as a mother, but as a father. And some of those qualities can be very difficult to develop, I'm sure.
Mm.
And it's really starting a new life when a woman is becoming a mother. And I've been able to watch my wife go through that this past year. So it is pretty amazing to see firsthand that transition because there's not really anything to prepare women for being a mom
Sure.
other than the 9 months of growing the baby and I guess just figuring it out along the way.
Yeah, and it seems to me that, a lot of women also take, pay more attention to like the small details of how people are feeling. And also
Yeah,
like
yeah.
even, in art and in nature, I feel like I notice like my mom or women that I've been close to just pick up on like these little beautiful things that might like the naked eye or our eyes might overlook.
Hmm.
And I think it's like a really important part of that motherhood energy, being able to like help somebody grow up is like being able to point out those small details and make them
Hmm.
really matter.
Hmm.
That's one
Hmm.
thing I've seen working around with kids that sometimes I've not been too good at. I might overlook some little thing that could have been used to really intensify that moment and make it matter in like a core memory. And sometimes like women can just pick up on that and be like, oh, let me put this little dash here that's
Yeah,
yellow and it
yeah.
matters. You know what I'm saying?
Well, women actually do have more color receptors in their eyes in men. They
Mm.
can notice different colors that men cannot. And I think that was a pretty recent discovery.
Mm.
And so it's easy to say, like, oh, the average woman is more sensitive than a man, but the average woman has more senses than a man.
Yeah.
So it's more like physical than figurative, if you think of it that way.
Hmm.
And yeah, it is very consistent. I think that that is the case.
Yeah.
Being able to have that attention to detail along with the empathy. And I think that's part of the reason that, recently in the past decade or so, you see such an influx of women in the corporate sector being so successful.
Hmm.
And I actually saw a video discussing about how there's more women graduating college than men now, which is new within the last decade. And there's also like twice as many female executives as there were 10 years ago, I believe.
Mm.
And that shift is even more so kind of showing men, I think, oh, women are really, really important because they're capable of so much.
Yeah.
And they do things that not only we can't do in some circumstances, but a lot of things that we certainly are not all that willing to do.
Sure.
And I think more so in terms of like family building. I was talking to you earlier about I was watching my daughter today, and sometimes I have these thoughts like, oh, it'd be cool to be a stay at home dad. And then I'll take care of her by myself for like 2 days straight. And that's very tiring.
Mm.
It's very tiring. And I've seen women make it look effortless, with like 3 kids. And I can't wrap my head around even taking care of 3 kids with the help of another person, but let alone by yourself. So big shout out to the single moms out there
Hmm.
because that's just another feat in and of itself. And it really is a superpower to be able to do that. And again, transition into that role without really having a blueprint or some definitive instruction behind it, right?
Yeah, seriously. And I'm really glad you brought up that recent study found, the women and their color receptors, their ability to perceive color, the difference between that and men. I think that that's a great biological indicator of like why they're great leaders,
Oh,
why
yeah.
they're able to do
Right.
these things. And then like you're pointing to the corporate world, a lot of that emotional intelligence, being able to kind of communicate without
Hmm.
because you already know the differences between the genders and their communication styles. A
Yeah.
lot of times women are able to just like understand when someone's upset,
Hmm. Hmm.
hopefully address it face on.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, these are like generalizations.
Generalizations for
Definitely
sure.
met women who aren't as empathetic, right?
100%.
And also meet women who don't want to be moms.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that more and more just after seeing my wife go through pregnancy and actually birth a child. Like, that's kind of a scary experience. And, now I think Maddie's more in the headspace of wanting to have another kid, but immediately afterwards, she's like, "Oh yeah, I don't want to do that again."
Mm.
And everybody's like, "Oh, you kind of forget about it," and she admits that that's kind of what's going on, and that seems to be the general consensus. But birthing a child is something that I cannot imagine. And Maddie, for some reason, thought she was like, "Oh yeah, if somehow you could carry a child, you would do it for me, right?" I was like, "What? No, that
I'm weak.
sounds so unnatural. No, I wouldn't do
That
that."
sounds so unnatural.
Well, that and it doesn't sound
Yeah,
fun
it sounds
either.
terrible.
But I have a lot of respect for women that do that not only once but multiple times
Mm,
because it's very necessary.
for sure.
There's actually arguments right now of there being a population crisis, and that sounds crazy with there being 8 billion people in the world, but just the way that manufacturing and business growth and infrastructure and economies and all those things grow, you need the population to grow proportionately. So sometimes some of these things that we're doing on an industrial level
Hmm.
don't really add up to the amount of people that we have inflowing because that is slowing down quite a bit, largely because there are a lot more female professionals that are waiting later in life to have children or not having children at all, or
Mm,
waiting later to at least get married or not getting married at all because women are realizing they don't have to get married and have a family, whereas 50 years ago, that was the expectation. And that was more so the reason that uh, female college graduation was at such a low point for so long, also just because of the traditional family dynamic
Yeah.
in America. So, as those things change and develop, I think that we will see some, I guess, adjustments need to be made in planning as far as like our economy and uh, kind of how our whole system is developed because of some of these things that are now becoming norms that folks might not be aware of at face value.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I always think about how people will say that there's kind of the competition between genders, and oh, if the
Hmm.
one's doing better, the other one's not,
Yeah.
right? And historically, we've always been whole. That's the things that have helped past civilizations grow forward is they figured out like talents, yin yang type thing. You come together,
Hmm.
right? And that's what I always like to point out to people. If you look at these like ancient Egyptian texts and everything, they have their queens, they have the Cleopatras, they have the people
Hmm.
that they saw as these like great leaders
Right.
because of their skills and their unique talents. So I
Hmm.
always like kind of challenge people to recognize that the society you're in, where you talk about maybe a more misogynistic past,
Yeah.
can also still be recent. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's just that we're not seeing the large scope of it.
Yeah.
And also how valuable it was when they did feel like they were together.
Hmm.
Because when we complement each other, like we're unstoppable. But
Hmm.
when we compete against each other, it's really easy.
Cause a lot of unnecessary strife. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's kind of where we're at now is we kind of compete against each other in our
Hmm.
life from the 90s, early 2000s. Like we've seen a lot of like competition and people needing to get back for what they feel like happened before. And just it turned
Hmm.
into like very tough and not a lot of love shown.
Yeah, and I've also seen some research kind of lean towards thinking that high level of competition is more so the man wanting to stay relevant,
Mm,
because it's like as females start to fill all these roles that traditionally men have had, but then it's a lot more difficult for men to fill the roles that traditionally females have had.
hmm.
In a way, it's like, okay, where does the male fit in, especially now as unemployment is rising and there's artificial intelligence. And so it really is more so affecting men in as far as employment and the job sector and, economic growth. And that's largely in part because of the success of women. So
Hmm.
there does need to be this cohesion, kind of a joint effort, I guess, as these things begin to change, because we're all relevant and we have so much to add to one another. But
Sure.
there just can't be, I guess, the feeling of threat when you have a female step into a business setting that they're just not typically there.
Right.
And that, I guess, is easier said than done for whatever reason.
Mm.
Again, I don't know if it's more pride. Uh, do you have a hypothesis of why that's so difficult to integrate and be a little more, I guess, amicable with genders trying to mesh into, I guess, roles that have been traditionally male dominated?
Sure, I think it can be pride. I think that people feel as if the hierarchy has to be explainable through like physical features, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe they just respect a man's intelligence more because of their past conditioning and things of that nature.
Mm.
And it could make it really hard for them to think that this woman who's leading them can be like very, have a lot of ingenuity and genius and,
Mm-hmm.
cutting edge thinking. So it could just be the conditioning. It also could be that they're not used to being led, like from
Yeah.
coaches, from
Right.
all these
Right.
different people who have probably yelled at them and gave them corrections and stuff in the past have probably not had female energy behind it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
A mixture of a lot of those things. It's funny because I wanted to kind of pose a question, and this might be for the Father's Day podcast, but one thing I'm thinking is interesting because you're talking about how a lot more women are doing a lot better in these workforces,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously we know the male statistic is a lot more of like they have higher statistics in violent crimes and
Mm-hmm.
imprisonment and all these types of things.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, it would be hard to study this, but I wonder, since we started this talking about how a lot of homes don't have the father, I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if daughters do better coming up in homes without their father, like compared to sons. You know what I'm saying?
Oh.
Cause,
Well.
and I don't know the answer to that. That's just
Hmm.
something that I wish I could have the statistics for because I think it might be a little more detrimental for the young boys to come up without their fathers. But I don't know, and I know that's sensitive, so I don't want to just make that claim. But I would love to
Yeah,
be
no,
able to
that would
research
be
that.
interesting to have research behind that because I think that, as with anything, it's going to affect people differently. And I think it can be equally detrimental and it can also be small effect upon someone
Hmm.
because I don't really believe that a mom can fill in a father role or a father can fill in a mother role.
Yeah.
Like obviously they get put in a situation where they have to attempt to do that, but there is clearly a difference there. So um, with that void, I think a lot of it depends on whether or not someone's able to find another male figure or female
Hmm.
figure to kind of fill in that place.
Sure.
Some type of model because there needs to be an example, whether it's a bad example or a good example.
Hmm.
Um, that a kid growing up and just not seeing that other side will just have a lot more uncertainty once they get into that situation later in life to where they're trying to fill in that role themselves.
Sure.
And then as far as resources, um, boys and girls are given different opportunities early in life, I would say,
Hmm.
and that's good and bad opportunities. So the prevalence of a male getting into like gang activity or getting
Sure.
in that kind of trouble, I think is going to be a lot more probable with the male figure not being present as long as the male figure is not also in that kind of activity,
Totally
right?
understand what you're saying. Yeah, because you could lead
Yeah.
it into that violent
Yeah,
life for sure.
yeah.
I get what you're
So
saying.
so yeah, there's a lot of factors there,
Mm-hmm.
but that would be interesting to
It
be
would be.
able to research that.
It would be. I know, because I always draw back to kind of how I'm saying I see so many of these different students come for the past 3 years, and it's usually the more
Mhm.
physically aggressive
Mhm.
young boys, like just don't have any male at home,
Yeah.
and they're
Can you think of any students you've worked with that have a father and not a mother?
no, I've never, no, there's not
Yeah.
one that comes to mind where I only was talking to dad. No.
Yeah, that's interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know a couple single dads, and yeah, their kids have their own difficulties, and I can tell watching these kids grow up that it is different than the difficulties that come with not having the father there.
For sure.
Um, and one that comes to mind is a little girl who doesn't have her mom there with her hardly ever, and it's mostly the dad. And she just has a lot of questions that I feel get kind of left unanswered.
Mm-hmm.
And she'll ask about her mother a lot, very curious about her mother. Whereas I feel like my friends that grew up without their father, they kind of accept it early on, and there's not as much talk about it.
Yeah, dude, I've even heard kids make like lighthearted jokes that they've probably read on the internet where they're like, "Oh, my dad went out to get milk and never came back," but it's just a kid who really doesn't have his dad, and I
Mm-hmm.
see him trying to deflect it with that kind of like meme,
Mm-hmm.
like comedy, but I'm like, dang,
Yeah,
dude,
yeah,
like
yeah,
that's just kind of how you learn to narrate that,
yeah. Uh huh.
just as for like a light joke, but I know it hurts. But either
Mm-hmm.
way, that's why I said that might be for the Father's Day podcast. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna try to go
Mm-hmm.
back to my side. Cause shout out to my
Yeah.
mom. You know what I mean? My mom, I lived with my mom, just us two, when I was 14, 15, 16, 17. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I was going to community college, 18, 19,
Mm-hmm.
just me and my mom. And I can only imagine from her perspective, like having this young man go from a teenager, to a late teen and dealing with what I had going on,
Mm-hmm.
seeing me trying to grow and express myself and having to only be my mom there.
Yeah.
I give her a lot of credit for that because I know it was difficult. We used to argue all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
many things I wasn't seeing eye to eye with her with, and I felt like I was way more
Mm-hmm.
grown than I was at that time. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? And I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
a lot of women deal with that. Just young men thinking they can just come up and start doing whatever, not recognizing how dangerous their decisions are or just
Yeah.
how stupid in general their decisions are.
Yeah. And your mom would definitely try to keep you in line
For
though.
sure.
And I've seen where sometimes the mom doesn't feel like they have the power to do that, especially you're 6'4".
Yeah.
There are situations like even my mother-in-law, her son is also 6'4", like twice her size. And, when it comes down to it, a 16, 17-year-old, emotions flying, hormones through the roof, sometimes the mom doesn't feel comfortable being able to control those situations.
Mhm.
And, I've heard of the mom trying to give their child a spanking and he's like 6'4". Like, it doesn't really work out that way.
Nah.
So you have to find this different way of communicating, different way of discipline. And that
Yeah.
can be really difficult, especially if that change happens right before high school time, like it kind of did for you, right?
For sure.
Um,
And one thing I never stopped and thought about is like my mom's also going through her own life right now. I didn't start
mm,
thinking about that till I got older and I started
yeah.
really like thinking about who my mom is. But when I
Yeah.
was younger, I didn't think like, hey, she also could have stress from outside influences. And now I'm
Hmm.
raising the bar, just being selfish out here.
Yeah, well, and that's being blessed.
Sure.
If
Super
you
blessed.
think of the kids who are aware of the struggle their parents
Right.
are going through, those are really hard
That's so
situations.
true.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
because most parents are able to kind of cover things up and make it look like it's a little bit better than it really is. And I've seen that happen at really low poverty like situations too. So yeah, when there's like the little girl taking care of her little brother while mom's at work all
Mm.
day type thing, and they know they're struggling, that's like a whole different ball game.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we've always been blessed, regardless of our little mishaps and life situations. But that is a good point that parents need to realize too that the kids don't understand that you have your own life.
Right.
The same way we get in the mindset like, man, my life revolves around my child. The child thinks like, yeah, your life revolves around me.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is my show.
Straight up. Yeah.
And that can be really difficult
For
to
sure. And like
balance.
you're saying, we're blessed to have had moms that allowed us to kind of grow through that. Because I've
Hmm.
definitely worked with young kids, 13 years old, 12 years old, who are arguing all day long with their moms. And it's always, you think you're grown and you shut up, you and shut up, you and you think you're grown. And it's just back and forth
Hmm.
discord all the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because I know that if it gets to that point where you and your child argue all the time and it's like high level emotions in the house all the time,
Hmm.
I don't even know how to suggest coming back from that. I know people go to therapy. When I was younger, me and my family went to therapy. We went to
Yeah.
therapy and talked about all these like kind of higher emotional things that would happen around. So,
Yeah, I think that is the best advice. There needs to be like a middleman that doesn't have all that emotion charged within the conversation,
mm-hmm,
especially with a kid involved, because there's only so much the parent can do. Like we said earlier, or well, not earlier in the previous episode, though, when you tell somebody to calm down, it doesn't make them calm.
mm-hmm.
So it's like if you're the mom or the dad talking to your kid, and you're like, "Oh, you need to calm down. We need to talk about this." It's a very hard situation to diffuse.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'm glad that you were able to do that and it seemed beneficial.
well, I don't know. Maybe we
Yeah.
can have my mom on one day and she could say if it was beneficial because I don't really know. I feel like I was too young to like
Mm,
decode if it was working or not. I just kind of remember
mm,
it as like a ritual and, I
mm-hmm,
don't really remember what was
mm-hmm.
happening.
Yeah, it can definitely go one of two ways, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
We both work with a lot of women, and that has definitely given us a new perspective and respect for moms as well. I've worked with like old moms whose kids are, well, I didn't mean to say old moms, but that's not nice. Moms whose children are older than me, and
Right.
then also like newer moms who have infants. And I've even worked with pregnant women, and I've worked with a lot of pregnant women actually. And so being able to see that process and know the woman before motherhood and during the process and then afterward and later down the process and just seeing it really is beautiful seeing like the interactions and how much women do care for their kids and the different stages and how they still regard their child as their child regardless of how successful they are or the tension they may have experienced. And again, this is generalizations. I know some people are probably listening to this like that's not my relationship with my mom at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is unfortunate, but if we do generalize with that what that role is, it's such a difficult role to fill that it's hard to say that someone's not a good mom because
Right.
there's no blueprint, right?
Yeah.
You just get thrown into it and you have to figure it out. And, kids make you mad. And you, again, like we said, you have to deal with your own life going on too and all these curveballs being thrown on you. And then, God forbid, you not have the support of the father there
Right.
or even have any family members around, right?
Yeah.
So, I've seen situations like at a mall, for instance, where you see like a kid acting out and then the mom's kind of like yelling at him and it just seems like way too much tension. And, it could be easy to look at that and be like, oh, wow, she doesn't know what she's doing. Like she can't control the kid. But, kids are wild. Kids are
Mhm.
wild. You've seen wild kids.
Yeah, straight up.
You've seen like way down the spectrum of wild children. And then
Mhm.
I think back just of how I was as a kid. And I think if you ask any of the adults that knew me as a kid, they would probably say I was a good kid, but I was still kind of wild for a good kid.
Yeah.
Like I was doing basically what I wanted when I wanted. It was just never like extreme recklessness
Mhm.
because I was just smart enough to not get into all that. But
Mhm.
even my mom had her hands full. So I can just think of some of the other extreme examples of other children and how much more intense that experience could be.
Yeah, and that's where I always get emotional thinking with my mom because it really just comes down to if you get kind of neglected or given up on. I'm just always so happy that my mom didn't give up on me or hit a point where she
Yeah.
was like, wow, this is too much and I have to, you know,
Mhm,
let go
mhm.
of this situation. Because truly, like you're saying, seeing kids with different behaviors, high aggressive behaviors, and then just being bad kids or whatever you would call that.
Right.
Um, the thing that matters is the consistency of the people that support them. You know what I
Mhm,
mean? Like day to day, you could have an episode, you could have a moment, you could even have a crisis.
mhm.
But what really matters after a year, 3 years, 5 years is the people that consistently came to support.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because
Mhm.
eventually that's going to turn around.
Yeah.
And and
That
yeah.
that's like the foundation of the mother role, I think. Showing unconditional love and
Mhm.
being that first example of what that is
Yep.
because I can't think of one situation in my whole life that my mom wasn't supportive of me. She there might have been times where what I was doing she didn't think was the best idea, but she doesn't just come out and straight say that. She'll try to lead me another direction, but always knowing that I want to do great things. And she has had these experiences that have been similar to mine being a nurse. And
Mhm.
so some of the emotional strife that I've experienced, she's able to help me through that and making sure that I'm not making emotional decisions because I've always been kind of an emotional person. And then
Yeah.
so as a teenager, as an emotional boy that's like an athlete, that's a lot to deal with, right?
Mhm.
But my mom's always had this gentle, understanding approach, and I'm so appreciative of that. And she's listening to this, so shout out to you, mom.
Straight up.
Wouldn't even be able to do stuff like this without you because just having that level of that empathy. You taught me this empathy, being able to understand people and think about other people and not just be in my own little bubble. And that took a while to develop because I've discussed before about how, like, growing up with this kind of inflated confidence that you feel almost invincible and it almost flows into this narcissism,
Yeah,
right?
man.
And then I probably would be a narcissist if my mom wasn't around.
Stop. Dude, that you're hitting the nail on the head. That's exactly how I
Yeah,
feel too.
yeah. So I'm just so glad that she's always been there to steer me down the right path. Even
Mhm.
I can think of times where she let me make my mistake. Like she knew I was gonna do what I wanted to do, right?
Mhm.
But she's still there to pick up the pieces and lead me down the right path after the fact too.
Yeah,
You know.
for sure. And I was thinking the same thing as you. You know, from my dad, I do learn competition and more logical things. But
Mhm.
from my mom, I did learn like, don't be a jerk. How are you making other people feel?
Mhm.
Take a second and think about how you might have just made that person feel.
Yep.
You don't want to make other people feel bad. You don't want to hurt other people's feelings or just come off narcissistic, like you were saying.
Right, exactly. And then I was thinking back to how we're discussing kind of the female success in corporate America within the last decade or so. I think maybe some of the pushback from men is that women have that emotional aspect,
Hmm.
which can be a tool. but I think sometimes in terms of like business and finances, it can be seen as a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I know my dad has told me not to make emotional decisions when it comes to my money
Mm-hmm.
and when it comes to my investments.
Sure.
And I don't think that that type of emotion is the same when it comes to business, but it can lead someone to be more focused on like fairness or equality and not so much on like profitability and
Mm-hmm.
growth at
For
times.
sure.
So maybe that mindset might not be seen to fit the agenda, but
Mm-hmm.
I know that I've seen women that make sure that their persona that they're portraying is not reflecting that they're going to be that kind of more emotional,
I understand.
um, I guess, face within the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget what conversation I was listening to. I think it was a real estate developer, a female, and a guy was asking her if she has to act differently when she's in a room with all these like million and billionaire real estate investors. And at first she said no. And then she went on to kind of correct herself and be like, well, I kind of have to read the room. And there are people that won't really respect me if I don't kind of act a little more masculine in my approach
Mm-hmm.
to when I'm trying to settle these business deals and
Sure.
stuff.
I understand that.
Which I don't know if that's fair. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
again, I think it's just kind of this subconscious thing of relating the emotion to the actual deal.
Mm-hmm.
But I think over time that might be something that we see change as well as these settings do become more female dominant. And it's
Definitely.
something that's easier for us to foresee just working in education and mental health for you, and then me working in the healthcare field. There are a lot of women in those fields. So some people listening to this from the male perspective, you might not work in a setting that has a lot of women right now. So it sounds a little bit crazy, but
Because this is, I think, the trade-off, like you're talking about. Because I'll see women who are like NBA officials or
mhm,
D1 men's officials, and they
right,
they have to also be pretty stern in their approach, like not showing a lot of emotion and just being very straightforward to have that
right.
communication. And it's interesting because that's a male-dominated field, obviously, like
Hmm.
officials and coaches.
And I've actually enjoyed seeing that having more female officials.
Yeah,
I
I like
can't
it
tell
too.
you why, but there's something about it that it is a good thing to see.
Well, the reason I like it is because they're bringing, like you're saying, a kind of more feminine energy and showing that it can also neutralize very high intense, like testosterone driven conflicts.
Yeah,
And they're in the middle of it, still neutralizing it almost like a mom does in a game room with two 9-year-olds that are getting too rough. And
yeah,
they're able to do
yeah.
that with the 30-year-old professional athletes
Because
too.
Draymond Green's gonna hesitate a little bit to come screaming a female ref's face before he's screaming in a male's, right?
But I guarantee, like from my experience, I've seen men go at the female officials way more than they would a man.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
worked with female officials that are a high level, great, legendary D1 officials, professional officials, and I've seen men pretty much irrationally like yell at them more. And I'm sitting
Mm-hmm.
there thinking like, dude, she's way better than me right now, and like no one
Mm.
said anything to me
That's a
yet,
good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I've seen it in the hospital too. There's men that I've taken care of that they're fine with me, and then all of a sudden a woman comes in, they're like very demanding and disrespectful, and I have to put them in their place. I'll be like, whoa, like you're either gonna treat me like that or you're gonna treat them how you treat me. But
Mm-hmm.
like they are doing the same job, and actually she's working harder than me.
Yeah, for
Like I'm not
sure.
gonna lie, so you need
Mm-hmm.
to respect her for that. Um, and then I think a lot of patients get in a place where, they are in a vulnerable setting, but we are serving them. So they
Mm-hmm.
feel like, oh, you have to do what I say. But like,
Yeah.
no, that's not how it's going to be, right? There needs to
Mm-hmm.
be that mutual respect in that setting, especially if you expect to heal properly and you want people to bust their butt to help you heal.
Exactly.
And I've seen women just kind of, really be strong in that role and not let that bickering and that disrespect, I guess, disrupt their character, which is something that I respect so highly. And then also seeing women stand up for themselves,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's something that I've definitely noticed these female nurses have to develop over time, because I can't think of nearly as many situations where a young female nurse stood up for herself the way that some of these older female nurses have,
Mm-hmm.
which, it's unfortunate that they have to go through it this many times that they've developed that ability.
Right.
But again, it's something that we have to respect once we see too, because these are men who are bigger than them and are belligerent, but
Mm-hmm.
they're sitting there standing their ground and telling them how they need to act, and also explaining that the whole purpose of this is that they want them to be better,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they're being strong in their decisions and in their approach just because they want that person to heal and they want what's best for them. And that's something that, I can do myself, but I think a lot of men aren't really able to think that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had times where it's difficult for me to think that way because of something that someone said to me, or they tried to hit me or spit on me, and it's hard for me to just be like, okay, like I still need to take care of you.
For
Like
sure.
that, I can feel it boiling up inside of me. And
Mm-hmm.
that I'm so grateful for the calm, cool, collected women that I work with, because they kind of remind me that, like, okay, this is the setting. Like, yes, that's not okay, but I still have a job that I need to do.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beauty of being able to kind of be around. And that's why I'm always going to be an advocate for just complementary male and female energy,
Mm-hmm.
because I see how much great things it can do if we just don't hate on it and
Mm-hmm.
like let the talents come from it that are supposed to grow. And then I bring the things that I'm given.
Yeah.
And when we complement each other, we're just so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can get any task done professionally. You know, we can do so much good stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously, as you're shown, families and being able to raise children, keep people away from feeling like they're misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
And that's the other thing, man. These women doing this and being moms on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
I tell some of these male patients that are being disrespectful, I'm like, do you know what she deals? I'm like, this lady has 4 kids, bro.
bro.
Like, one, she's not afraid of you.
I know.
Two, she doesn't deserve this.
Right.
I get a little bit riled up when I see that level of aggression and disrespect, because
Yeah.
I can't understand it, period. But especially when somebody's trying to take care of you, and then it's a female,
For sure.
definitely something that needs to change. One thing that has made me uneasy in the hospital setting is kind of the lack of security and the lack of support in some of those situations. But again, I've seen women band together and make it work, and in a fearless manner,
Man,
right?
same.
And yeah,
There's like
just
people I want to shout out personally right
I
now,
know
but I'm
that's what I'm
not
thinking in
going
my
into it because I'm like, yeah, you did that. Like y'all
I'm
did that. You
thinking of
know it.
very
You know who you
specific
are.
situations when
For
I say
sure,
that,
man.
and yeah, it's really amazing because
Hmm.
it's not once but many times.
Many times, and like
Yeah.
and part of the reason for me why women can be so inspiring is because like you're saying, they'll take those lumps, but it seems to be like they're still oriented to the big picture of what
Mm-hmm.
matters
Yeah.
and what's truly going to matter at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like as men we can get so emotional, we'll lose sight of the big picture and only
Yeah.
think about what's supposed to be right now.
100%. Yeah. I've had through COVID so many women say, "Man, I got into nursing because of this," and then
Hmm.
my mind would sometimes be like, why am I doing this? Just asking in this moment where I hear somebody else say, man, I got into this because of this. And like, that's what's keeping me going. And
Hmm.
just having that kind of refreshing perspective is so beneficial.
Hmm.
And, thinking back on it now, since college, have always been around a lot of women in professional setting because healthcare is really all I've done. And, even working in the gym setting, there's a lot of women. So, but you, as an official, I'm
Hmm.
sure there's been certain professional settings where maybe it was only men. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And like with my schooling, studying psychology, my classes were mostly women. So a lot of my
Right.
school practicum, all that stuff, I was mostly with women. But like you're saying, in the field of officiating, especially because I do men's officiating, I don't officiate women's
Right.
college basketball. I don't really do women's professional pro-ams, anything like that. I
Mm-hmm.
do all men's. So mostly I'm around men's officials.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's good. Once again, I think the people that communicate the best have adopted a little bit of the feminine energy
Right.
because you can't be so testosterone driven. You can't be like so apex and try to get your point across. You have to be like, malleable, and you have to be
Mm-hmm.
able to kind of understand and be patient, and these things
Mm-hmm.
are a little more feminine.
Yeah. I think now I know a lot of guys would disagree with you on that, but why do you think that is? That there's this kind of pushback against having being in touch with your feminine side.
Yeah. And I think because we'll relate it to being like afraid. We'll relate being in tune with our emotions to being afraid. When yeah,
Like vulnerable, right?
vulnerable, but
Yeah.
the thing about that is we do feel fear, and sometimes we do feel vulnerable, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we do feel jealous and nervous, and these
Mm-hmm.
things that we feel like are negative side effects to a feminine energy.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's kind of being honest and integrating that whole into yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because you truly are that kind of yin yang symbol, and so are we, you know. That's why I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about complementing energy this whole
Mm-hmm.
time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we're taught to be afraid of the more negative side, so we'll neglect them, and then they'll actually come up in us as jealousy, and it will
Mm-hmm.
come up in us as weird pride, and like you said,
Yeah.
narcissism. Sometimes not
Yeah.
recognizing how you're making other people feel.
Yeah. I've also been in settings where it seems like, oh, if I show that feminine side, I might almost be in danger. Like somebody might
Mm,
think they can take advantage of me, you know? I like if it's I guess a setting you probably shouldn't be in the first place,
mm-hmm.
right? Is what I'm
No,
aiming
I
at
totally
here.
understand when it's like some survival, when it's
Yeah,
something where you
yeah.
really got people on their like posturing and it's now
Mhm.
getting down to
Mhm.
it. I get
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
Looking soft isn't always the best move, you
Right,
know.
right. But then if you want to be able to diffuse that situation and not let it escalate,
Right.
that's kind of what it takes,
Right. We've
right?
been spending the last decade talking about how people feel like our police officers need to be trained better in communication. Now,
Mhm.
if every police officer man pulled up to every man with nothing but testosterone and like apex energy, those are ending in fights way more often. And we know that happens. And that's the unfortunate part. But what
Mhm.
we actually need is a more like integrated, like, okay, like compassionate,
Yeah.
which some of them do as well. I'm just
Mhm.
saying, since we from social media have sat at home and talked about how police need to train for the last decade, that's a big
Yeah.
part of what we're saying is
Mhm.
that this like hostile male energy that might be like over the edge in a situation can't be met with another man that's gonna do that. You know,
Mhm.
especially when you're armed, it's all bad at that point.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of high intense settings where we do need the man in charge of that situation to be more in tune with the feminine energy.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah. Um Motherly qualities are powerful, man. They're
for sure.
powerful.
You
And
know, and that's why I'm so blessed. And I'm glad we're doing a Mother's Day episode because I feel like
yeah.
a large part of my greatness is my mom and my grandma.
Mhm.
You know, those two women are huge in what I feel like is now a great person and a great perspective that's budding in the world.
Right. Yep. All this positivity that I have, like, I've had clients ask me, like, "Where'd you learn how to dance?" Like, I got it from my mom. Like,
Mm.
all this joy, like, my mom showed me how to do that. And my dad showed me how to work hard and be organized and be
Yep.
a leader and be a provider. And the role that my mom showed me is really just how to be a lover and be a positive influence in people's life. My mom always smiles, you
How to
know.
be a vibe.
Yeah, how to be a vibe, and that's just something I take so much pride in, and I'm never gonna let it waver,
Mm.
and that'll forever be respect to you, mama.
Yeah.
Like 50, 60, 70 years from now. So that's cool. You talk about legacy, you talk about our DNA, what we're gonna pass down through these generations, and just seeing my little daughter, like she has that same energy, wanting to dance and stuff, and it's beautiful to see. I know some people they're like, "Oh, I don't want my little girl to grow up. Like nobody's gonna date." And I was like, I'm just getting ready for draft day, right? I want to
Mm-hmm.
make sure my girl has a great boyfriend and then a great husband, so she can have a beautiful family like I do. Because I know she's gonna be a great mom, just like her mama was, and just like her mama's mama was. So, um, being able to look at things that way, I think is very powerful. Because again, I get why people don't want to have kids because
Yeah.
it's definitely not easy.
Sure.
I get why people want to stay single because relationships aren't easy, but that's one of those selfless acts to me.
Yeah.
Being in a committed relationship and having children and dedicating your life to raising those kids and taking care of your family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that will help you grow personally in a way that no other experience can do other than building that family and doing that. So, there's no wrong way to live life,
Mm.
but if you do want to have that full understanding and be able to be empathetic and have that connection with people, especially understanding a mom and understanding children, I think you have to have that experience within your own home.
Yeah, you know, and on this podcast, so much we've talked about mentorship. So, you know, the mom really is the first mentor. You know,
Mm-hmm.
she's there with us as we're developing our heartbeat.
Mm.
She's there with us as we extended to have our own autonomous heartbeat. And, we're feeling her still, and the
Mm-hmm.
warmth of her skin, those early days of us growing, they're really our first mentor on how to be in this world and how to even live.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always going to have a beautiful shout out for just that, the origin of motherhood. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
it's hard to really define what I'm trying to say, but those like early days where you're nothing but unconscious and they're supporting you with
Mm-hmm.
all their energy until you like slowly break off and go.
Yeah, yeah. I remember holding my daughter for the first time and like looking in her eyes. I'm like, oh, I'm the first person you're seeing like face to face. But it did not take long for her to know who Mama was, and
Mm.
she just pays so much more attention to her mom and her facial expressions and where she is in the room. And for a little bit, I was jealous about it. I was like, dang, but now I realize I'm gonna have my time because, like you said, those early stages it's meant to be with the mom and the baby. And
Yeah.
there were nights where I wish I could help and the baby's crying or whatever, but I know that the baby wants the mom, and that's like the solution there because that's nature, and you see that across different animals, different species, just how basic that motherly nature is. And Mother Nature is very amazing in having those congruencies between different animals and just being able to see what it is that our basic physiology is meant to be here for,
For
right?
sure. And that's why it's always going to blow my mind that this has become like a rift and a competition amongst genders, because it's like if you watch National Geographic or some documentary like you're talking about mothers and all these different species,
Mm-hmm.
there's like a clear way that they're kind of like doing their own thing that really matters and needs
Mm-hmm.
to be like heralded and described as very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For us to look at it and be any type of hate on it or any type of, oh, I'm not getting enough attention, I'm trying to, it's like, no, this is a whole other thing. Like you do you,
Right.
compliment one another,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't need to try to like throw shade on this like beautiful process of
Right.
motherhood and female energy.
And sometimes it takes the man, taking the back seat and realizing that this is not your time to shine, man. Because
Mm-hmm.
I've had times like, man, what about me? But
Exactly.
it's like, okay, this is not something you can get in the way of.
For sure. We all do. We all do
Yeah,
have that
yeah.
moment because we still have our egos and we see sometimes like just the thing a woman accomplished something that we just can't, and then we
Mm-hmm.
want to feel that kind of admiration
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very
Mm-hmm.
manly trait to be able to sit back for a second and be like, I don't need to say anything. I don't
Right.
need to feel like I'm right. I don't even
Oh
need to feel
yeah.
like I'm seen right now for the benefit of who should have the spotlight on them.
Yeah. And we'll dive into that on the Father's Day one too.
100%. We got so much to say because it's shout out to dads too, but
And that's only because we'll have more, I guess, anecdotal experience when it comes to the Father's Day episode. And we just wanted to come together today to speak and show our respect and our appreciation for the moms out there, with Mother's Day being a couple of days ago, just because none of us would be here without the moms. And
mm-hmm.
again, moms are just so amazing, and women are amazing in general. Even if you aren't a mom, just we all need to respect the women in this world and what they do and what they go through, and because what would we be without you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really that simple. So, fellas, get it together. Let the ladies know we love them,
Yeah,
and do it respectfully, please.
for sure.
And for R&B podcasts, I think it's powerful for two guys to be able to sit up here and talk about women and not say one. I don't think we said anything disrespectful. Somebody might tell me that we did, and if I did, please let me know.
Yeah.
But we'll run it back. I think we were very respectful because everything we said came from the heart, and that's really just our experiences with women have been so impactful in ways that I think often get overlooked. And we want you ladies to know that we appreciate you, and you have been such an integral role in our development, not only our mamas, but all the other women that have interacted with us as well.
Exactly. And we can't always pinpoint what you guys were doing, but as you see, we were in awe of it and we were inspired by it. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? So we can sit up here and kind of try to describe it, but really it was just awe inspiring. And it was
Mm-hmm.
awesome to see. And I can't, I love interacting with it now.
Mm-hmm.
I love
Mm-hmm.
seeing the same way that that nurturing spirit is still in my life. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah, so grateful for it.
mm-hmm.
So thank you everyone who listened this far, and especially thank you if you're a mama.
Mm.
And this is R&B podcast. You know where to find us: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, wherever you want to. We'll be there. every Thursday, ready to talk to you. Russ and Blake,
Peace.
next week.
Peace.
Peace.